All right, that departing figure was Sarah Huckabee Sanders, White House press secretary. She briefed the press for the first time in 2018, and in a few moments, we will be joined by our sterling member of the press, Mr. Major Garrett, chief White House correspondent. We could take the recap in reverse order of importance, starting with golf. President Trump, of course, critical of former President Obama's time on the course. Meanwhile, he has spent at least 75 days playing golf. We have Major now. We can go into the golf question. Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett joins us now from inside the briefing room. Major, we'll get into some serious issues, but what do you think about Ms. Sanders' response to criticism of President Trump's time on the links?
Right. So when Sarah Huckabee Sanders says the White House staff provides readouts or information about what the president does at his various golf courses, when it's pertinent, well, that's a definition known only to the White House and used not liberally but quite conservatively by this White House. Frequently, we have no idea whether or not the president's playing golf or taking meetings or doing some combination of the two. This is a much less transparent administration when it comes to what the president is doing at his own golf clubs. We know he's there, so there's a certain low-level advertising that always comes with the president's journeys to his clubs, either in Bedminster, New Jersey, or at Mar-a-Lago. But we don't always know when he's playing golf. And there are times when the White House sort of goes out of its way to let us know when the president's playing with, for example, members of the PGA Tour, who then subsequently talk about what a great golfer the president is. And, in fact, he happens to be a very good golfer. That's a fact. Maybe the best president golfer we've ever had in this country's history. Well, that's something the president takes great pride in. But in the main, this White House simply doesn't discuss what the president does at his golf clubs in the way, for example, previous administrations did, explaining that President Obama was either playing golf and always told us who his golf partners were usually. Same thing with President George W. Bush. George W. Bush, I will recall, oftentimes let reporters come out and take photographs of him playing golf just to illustrate this is what he was doing and spending some of his leisure time. President Trump much more reluctant to do that than his predecessors.
Moving on to Iran,
yes.
we heard strong talk from Madam Press Secretary describing the uprising there as organic, the citizens protesting as brave, and the United States in, quote, total solidarity. How is that kind of language and the protests in Tehran likely to impact America's relationship with Iran?
Well, clearly this administration wants to take a different tack than the Obama administration did back in 2009 during the so-called Green Revolution, which was ultimately crushed by the Iranian regime. This administration wants to wrap itself around and wrap its arms around the street protesters, those demonstrating against the Iranian government, and say the United States and other like-minded countries stand with you. Now, there is a considerable debate in foreign policy circles in this country as to whether or not that's a good idea. Does that not empower the regime to say, see, the United States, who is one of our arch enemies, if not our archest enemy, is against the regime, and that's against your own long-term best interest. That was the approach the Obama administration initially took. President Trump does not want to do that. And at the United Nations today, his UN ambassador made it also clear that this was a moment not just for the United States, but other countries to weigh in on behalf of those demonstrating in the streets of Tehran and other parts of the country. What's most interesting about today's briefing is that Sarah Sanders did not say this would necessarily accelerate the president's inclination to reimpose some sanctions against Iran as punishment for what she called repression of basic human rights in that country. That's still a decision this administration has to make by the middle of this month in collaboration with Congress. And there are those close to the president who believe this is a moment to, if you will, exploit the street protests and send a signal to Iran as to the rest of the world that it can be sanctioned outside of the Iran nuclear deal simply because of its response to street demonstrations.
Following a tweet from the president, Pakistan was discussed more extensively than it has been in a while.
Absolutely.
What do we think was behind the president's interest in that country, and what might the White House mean by more information coming out soon about Pakistan not doing enough to combat terrorism?
Well, that issue, Pakistan not doing enough to satisfy U.S. governments in pursuit of terrorists is a long-standing issue. It was an issue that bedeviled the Bush administration under George W. Bush, it bedeviled the Obama administration, and now apparently it bedevils the Trump administration. The ISI, the main intelligence service in Pakistan, has been accused in numerous instances of either turning a blind eye to the Taliban and other like-minded terrorist organizations in the Badlands of northern Pakistan, or actually supporting them and protecting them at times. So this is a long-running issue. What is interesting in the White House response to this tweet from the president, no apparent activity or revelation or bit of intelligence, according to the White House, inspired the president. This is something that he raised in his August speech when he said there'd be a renewed effort by the United States to reinforce its position in Afghanistan and try to defeat the Taliban militarily. Back then, Tony, you remember, the administration said, we're not doing what everyone else did. We're going to have a completely comprehensive strategy that's going to bring in the Pakistanis, and it's going to encourage them to be more supportive because they're going to take us seriously. Well, that part of the strategy apparently has run into the exact same problems that every previous strategy in dealing with Pakistan and the question of terrorists in Pakistan and what they do or don't do in Afghanistan. Well, it's the same issue for this administration. What the Trump administration is now threatening, as other administrations have, is to cut off some funding. What has happened in the past is when the United States raises that prospect, the Pakistanis either for a period of time change their behavior or suggest, well, our behavior could get even worse if you don't continue funding us, and that has often brought the money back on the table.
Now to the latest news out of Capitol Hill. Senator Orrin Hatch announcing his resignation. We heard some questions there to Sarah Huckabee Sanders about what the White House would think of his opponent. Would they support the next nominee, the next Republican nominee? That's because a lot of speculation that Mitt Romney, a very anti-Trump former presidential candidate, would be that nominee. What did you make of the answers you heard at the podium today? And is Romney going to run?
Well, we don't know if Romney's going to run. I don't have any fresh reporting on that. That has certainly been a speculated topic in Utah and would certainly create an interesting dynamic, to say the least, for not only Utah Republicans participating in any primary, should there be one, or if he becomes the nominee to run to succeed Orrin Hatch. What's also interesting is that Orrin Hatch was so complimentary of the president when the tax cut bill was finally passed. They had the big ceremony on the South Lawn. And the president had gone out of his way to encourage Orrin Hatch to run for another term, to deflect the possibility of a Mitt Romney run and the possible aggravating factors, politically and otherwise, that might come with that. Well, Orrin Hatch took all the president's encouragement and ignored it. That, to me, is somewhat striking for its short-term and possibly long-term political import.
All right, Major Garrett for us at the White House. Major, thank you very much.
You got it.